put together a new enemy, the Moblin, for our player, Link. But we have another enemy, the Moblin, who uses a projectile spear to attack Link. And we want Link to be able to deflect that projectile using his shield. So let's get cracking on that today, shall we? We have over here on my project code the code for checking for projectiles. So let's see. We start off first. If our player is not in the damage state, so he won't take damage from a projectile if he's currently in iframes. So if he's not in iframes, then we check to see if in position there is a projectile enemy, parent enemy projectile. And let's see here. Parent enemy projectile has the Moblin spear and the Moblin Hild spear. And as you know, we already currently have the Moblin Hild spear. So let's duplicate that real quick. Turn that into a object Moblin spear projectile. And we'll be able to throw that at our player. Make sure we have the cleanup in our cleanup section here. I could probably just put it in the parent, but you know, that's just too much trouble to actually do it the right way, right? So now we have a spear projectile available. It's not really doing much. We're going to imbue it with properties when we actually create them. So let's come over here. We can now, so we have this here, instance project. We detect a projectile if there's one in our place. So currently we're not using a list or anything. So this will only detect the first projectile that it detects, which is random. So if you have like 5 projectiles hitting Link all at the same time, it's kind of random, a toss-up of which projectile will actually be the one who does damage to him. But if you were to do instance place list, you could then have a list of all the projectiles, and then you can set up like a priority queue. So it prioritizes the one that does the most damage or the least damage first. You know, however you feel like doing it if you want to be fancy about it. But I don't believe that in the actual game they bothered with that kind of depth in programming. So we'll just do it this way. Let's pop open this. Make sure the code is a little bit easier for you to see there. This is in the step event, by the way, if you didn't notice. And this is the projectile check, which we had previously set up. And excuse me if I yawn here. I always yawn when it's 10 o'clock. And I'm about to go to sleep in an hour, but I'll put this together first for you all. Let's see here. To get us started with, we need to do some shield checks. And I'll pull over some code. Our hit height equals y minus instant projectile dot y. So what is this doing here? This is determining what height the projectile is at when it hits you. So let's see, my y, as you know from Link, let's pull open his thingy over here. Sprites, Link, and let's say the sprite standing, idle, that'd work. He is right there. That's where Link is officially at. So if we take my y minus instant projectile dot y, and the projectile's tip is its y position. So that would give me, like, say, if the spear hits right here, then it'll take my y, which will obviously be at a higher y value because y increases as you go down, remember? So this will be like y is 32, and this will be at y is 16 right there. So 32 minus 16 will give me 16 as my value for hit height. That tells me how high up my character the projectile hit. Hit direction, sine 2, instant projectile dot x minus my x. Just like the other instances of direction, we're basically saying, okay, well, If the spear hits me from the left, then so if the spear is at X position is at 32, and my X position is at 16. 32 minus 16 is 1. So sine 2, since 1 is a positive value, that gives me 1 as my value. If they were at the same x, it would still give me 1 because we're using sine 2, remember? And then if it was from the left, it would give me a negative 1. So facing direction, this tells me what direction I should or face, or something, I believe. The facing direction is equal to dir4.right. So if we are hit on the so if we're currently facing the right direction, then the direction that I need to be facing is 1, otherwise it is -1. So that's basically saying what side is my shield facing. So in this case, if I'm facing right, then my shield is facing right. If I'm facing left, then my shield is facing -1, which is left for our purposes here. Let's pull up some more code. And this is where it gets kind of complicated. So we come over here and we say if any, so this is a script I made where any variable you put into there will be compared to the value. And if any of them are equal to the value, then it'll return true. Otherwise, it'll return false. See? So if any state, in this case, I'm checking my state. If my state is equal to the move state, the jump state, the standing slash state, or the jumping slash state, and the hit height is greater than 12. So if I'm standing up and I'm in a state where I can actually deflect, because there are some states where you could end up not being able to deflect, and the projectile hits me above 12, which is basically saying anywhere from here up. Or if I'm in the duck state, ducking slash state, or the landing state, or the crouching states, and the hit height is less than or equal to 12, so if it hits me from here on down while I'm ducking, and my hit direction is equal to the facing direction. So if I got hit on the right and I'm currently facing right, then we are going to deflect that shield projectile. So this is some very basic coding here for the projectile. There's some projectiles which are completely destroyed, but we're not going to be implementing any of those for this purposes. But you can implement them yourself if you feel like it. Basically, you just do instance destroy. It's not really that hard. But in this case, since we're going to be bouncing our spear whenever it hits us, we need to tell our instance projectile that its speed needs to be slowed down to 1/4 of its original speed. Its direction needs to be flipped. So if it hits us on our right, then we want you to have an angle of 20. And this is so that there is instead of giving it a 100%, so if we were to completely turn it around, so instead of going 180, and it would end up going at a degree of 0 or 360, depending on how you want to think about it. If it's going left, it'd be going 180 degrees. So therefore, to flip it around, we need to make it go 0 degrees, right? But in this case, we're going to have it go 20 degrees, which is lifting it slightly upwards. So it has a sort of bounced up into the air in a trajectory sort of look. Same thing when you hit from the right, from the left, you get a 160 degree bounce. So it bounces sort of at an angle like this, as you can see by my mouse flying around the screen right there, I hope, right? Then instant projectile.x plus equal 4 times the facing direction. So basically I'm just saying, okay, push so none of the projectiles go faster than 4 pixels per frame, right? So I can just say move the projectile 4 pixels away from the player character, to ensure the projectile is outside of our hitbox, and that also ensures that we are not able to be double hit by the projectile. Or more importantly, I guess I should say, it makes sure that the projectile doesn't get double countered or something. But I don't really actually think this is necessary, because if I've programmed everything right, once you get hit by the projectile, you go into the iframe timer, you go into the iframes, so you wouldn't actually be going back into this code to check for another hit at that point. So technically, this isn't really necessary, I guess. But if you didn't have iframes, this would probably be necessary. Otherwise, you'd end up with the player getting hit multiple times by the same projectile or something like that. Instant projectile.mask index equals sprite blank hitbox. So this is the single pixel hitbox that has a collision mask of 0000, and it's set to manual, precise per frame. And that's basically saying I have no hitbox anymore at this point. So the projectile still exists, but it no longer can interact with anything. So if say you wanted the projectile to previously be destroyed when it hit the wall or something, now it would just fall through the wall. In this case, it's just going to fall through the floor, actually. And, of course, make our little bouncing sound effect. Bonk. All right. So all of that in there is basically saying if we are hit by a projectile and it hits us in one of these areas that are protected, then bounce the projectile off of us. And as you know, the held spear is actually a projectile as well. Why did I do that? Well, because in Zelda 2, the spears can bounce off your shield as well. So if a Moblin's spear hits your shield, it will end up being countered. You won't take any damage from it. But it still plays this shield bounce sound. And in fact, if you play the Zelda 2, you can end up with like multiple frames of the bouncing sound effect being played, and it causes a kind of like boom, 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 boom sort of noise when that happens. If you're being hit by the enemy's spear multiple times, and this continues until the enemy gets close enough that the spear, when he's thrusting it at you, no longer hits from the left side. It now hits from the right side because it's been pushed so far forward, at which point then you end up taking damage. And so, yeah, that's basically how the spear works there. So let's put it in another parenthesis bracket there so we don't end up closing it. So we have deflected the spear if we have if we're in the right position to do so. Otherwise, we need to take some damage, and this is going to be a lot like this enemy collision damage. So we're going to take damage by our current HP being subtracted by the enemy's damage, or in this case, the projectile's damage. Same thing as right here. Then we say our iframes are true, set our iframe timer, our flashing timer, our state the damage, x fraction, y fraction to 0. That way we don't end up with weird boosting effects. Current y speed is equal to negative fall speed times 0.5, just kind of approximation. And that causes us to bounce back from where the enemy hits us. direction is equal to the sign of the projectile. Again, this is basically the same as right here, where we're determining what direction the enemy hit us from. Make sure that's sign 2. And current x speed is equal to the floor of the walk speed times the direction. And applied walk speed is equal to the same one. In other words, 1 pixel per frame movement. Because the walk speed is 1.5, if you remember, so that's why we're using the floor. So that brings it down to 1 times underscore dir. And you'll be seeing some changes to this kind of stuff in the future, because I'm experimenting with more advanced ways to put together the accelerations and the frictions and everything, so that you can have a more flexible system for all these things. So damage facing direction, again, based on what direction we got hit from. Should I be 1 or -1? And this is referring to your this will be used in your damage state to determine which direction you should be facing when you take damage. Some instances where we don't destroy the projectile. Okay, so yeah. Typically, we destroy the projectile when we take damage from it, except for in the case of the Moblin held spear, in which case then we don't destroy that spear, because we don't want to destroy the Moblin's held spear. I mean, it'd be kind of an interesting idea if you did. That'd be kind of useful, but in this case, we're not. So now we have a spear, and we are currently at 16 minutes, so let me see over here. I had a temporary spawner. I don't know if I still have it in here. That would spawn spears at you endlessly. Yes, so I'll just show you how to implement this real quick. Let's add a new group here. Call it spawners. We're going to need this in a bit anyways for spawning our actual enemies. So let's create an object, obj underscore spawner under actually, no, that's wrong. This is the Moblin spawner, which spawns Moblins in the room. It's not the spear spawner. Darn it. So it looks like I deleted the spear spawner. Oh well. Oh wait. Maybe I had it under room objects. Nope, it's not there either. Oh well. So anyways, we'll come back to the spawners in a little bit. So we'll need some of them, like object underscore bit underscore spawner and other things. We'll get to that. Let's see, what else can we do here? So we have Moblin. He's currently doing his thing and living his best life. Let's make sure everything's good on Link here before we move ahead. Yeah, I think it's all good. Let's go close all these windows. We have the Moblin living his best life, so we're going to duplicate him and create his good cousin, the Moblin. Moblin. All right. Pop open the code for him here. We have the create event. As before, we're going to need to change these up to Moblin states.dead. And we have move throwing. And dead is now 2. So we are taking damage, HP minus equal damage, iframes equals true, these things, but we don't have to bother with all of this because the Moblin has a different death animation. And we can also delete this little comment because it's no longer relevant. Oh, make sure you update the name on this guy to Moblin States. Come down a little bit further here. Update you to Moblin. Moblin. iframes, iframes, iframes. Let's see, floor sec times 0.5. He is 0.5 and sec times 1. Flashing state 12, false. Frames in state should be 0. Then palette index 0. Sprite Moblin. And the distance to player should be 0 because we are definitely going to need that now. And a couple other things. We're going to need direction to player and spear throws and shimmy time. Shimmy time. Come on, my lad. It's a shimmy time. We don't need my spear, though, anymore because we are not making a my spear. We're going to give him 2 HP. His damage will be 8. And the XP given is 10. Because we want to give him a little bit. Because he's not running around with the spear. X fractions, Y fractions. Ground excels, ground friction, gravity. And I didn't actually put an air friction because he's not really a jumper. So I guess you could just leave the code in there because it doesn't really matter. 1.1, 4.0, and all the rest of these should be about the same. It's looking good. And last but not least, make sure you update your sprite table. So we have sprite Moblin move, enemy Moblin move, and Moblin throw, and of course dead. Alright, that should be everything for the create event. For the step event, see how much time we're at. We're at 22. So we're going to do a little bit of an extra. So previously we were just checking the distance to the player to see how far we were before we disappear our enemy, because we don't need him to be showing up if he's too far away. But he has a little bit more player dependent information going on. So in this case, we also want to know what direction you are to the player, because we need him to face the player at all times. Then for pausing, it looks like I have a little bit of a problem here. Oh yeah. I'm missing a region, so region, end region. All right, I believe we're going to do it this way. So we're just going to pause him if he's too far away, because unlike the Moblin, which is kind of disposable since they just sort of run off the screen and constantly spawning, the Moblin is more of a determined enemy. He exists throughout the entirety of the room, and when you leave the room, come back to the room, he'll still be there, and so on and so forth. So we want him to more freeze rather than completely die when he gets far away from us. So if a pause object exists, then freeze me just like with the player. But if the player is far enough away from us, just freeze me in place, and or well, in this case, we're just we're also freezing in place because we're exiting. So that means none of our state execution happens. So yeah, nothing will happen. Coming to our ground check, that should be the same. Timers, no. These are going to be somewhat different again, because unlike the Moblin, which dies in one hit, so we don't need to worry about timers and stuff. In this case, since this guy typically can have 2 hits, we'll turn around his setup here. So damage check If iframes, then round iframe timer equals 0. Iframes is equal to false. So we're basically saying if the iframe timer is equal to 0, then set our iframes to false. And if our HP is less than or equal to 0 and our iframes are over, then make us dead and spawn some explosions. State check, same as usual. And timers should have our damage flash timer, which also controls our pallet index. Just remember about that. Our iframe timer. And last but not least, this shimmy timers. What does this shimmy timer do? Well, the shimmy timer is going to be used in the draw function here. Well, not in the draw function, actually. Draw should be the same as always. It'll be used in the move state or something. And we'll get to those next time because we don't really have enough time to go further, but I'm just going to explain a little bit what it does. So he does this little shimmy back and forth on the spot. So if you're far enough away from so if you're close enough to the player, the Moblin stops moving and he just sort of shimmies back and forth on the spot. So the shimmy timer is used by a sine wave function in order to tell him how far back and forth he needs to move each frame to do the shimmy on the spot function. All right, so I'd say that's good. Thank you everybody for joining me today. I'm going to let Past Me take it away with some Patreon names now. I'd like to thank my legacy Patreon supporters for their support during the NESGameMaker postseason hiatus. James Burton, JD Lowe, Suli, and Bezia. I'd of course also like to thank my current NES GameMaker Patreons for their support during the current NES GameMaker season. Kenneth Klein, Vladimir, Jamal, Fernando, Sergez, and Daniel. Your support helps make the NES GameMaker happen and helps support future projects from me. So until next time, remember to have good luck with your coding.